The autumn rain drummed against the tall windows of Clarence's house as Charles sat in his private study, staring at the photograph on his mahogany desk. It wasn't the official portrait of Camilla that usually occupied that spot, but rather an old, creased image of a young woman with flowing chestnut hair and sparkling blue eyes. Kate Middleton smiled back at him from the frame, her face frozen in a moment of pure joy from a charity event they had attended together years ago. Charles rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of the crown that would soon be his pressing down on his shoulders. At 74, he had waited his entire life for this moment. Yet now that his mother's health was failing and the transition seemed imminent, he found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about duty, love, and destiny. The door creaked open, and his longtime valet, Michael, entered with the evening tea service. The elderly man had been with the royal household for over 3 decades and could read Charles's moods better than anyone. "Your Royal Highness appears troubled this evening," Michael observed quietly, setting the silver tray on the side table with practiced precision. Charles didn't respond immediately. His mind was elsewhere, replaying the conversation he'd had with Kate just that morning at a private meeting in her Kensington Palace apartment. She had looked radiant as always, her natural grace and warmth filling the room in a way that Camilla's more formal presence never quite managed. "Michael," Charles said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, "have you ever wondered what might have been if circumstances were different?" The valet paused in his tea preparation, understanding that this wasn't a question about royal protocol or state affairs. "I believe, sir, that wondering about alternative paths is a natural human tendency, regardless of one's station in life." Charles stood and walked to the window, watching the London traffic blur past in the rain. The city he was born to serve stretched out before him, millions of people going about their lives, unaware that their future king was wrestling with the most significant decision of his life. The truth was that Charles had been infatuated with Kate Middleton for years, long before she married his son William. It had started innocently enough during the early days of William and Kate's courtship. Charles had been impressed by her poise, her intelligence, and, most importantly, her genuine love for his family. Unlike so many who sought to use their connection to the royals for personal gain, Kate seemed authentically committed to serving the crown and supporting those she loved. As the years passed, and Kate became the Duchess of Cambridge, Charles found himself drawn to her in ways that confused and troubled him. She handled royal duties with a natural elegance that reminded him of his beloved mother in her prime. More than that, Kate possessed something that had been missing from his life for decades, the ability to make him feel truly understood. His relationship with Camilla, while built on years of shared history and mutual affection, had always felt more like a comfortable arrangement than a grand passion. They understood each other, certainly, and shared many interests, but there was no spark, no electricity that made his heart race when she entered a room. With Kate, everything was different. Their conversations flowed effortlessly, whether they were discussing environmental conservation, his architectural interests, or simply sharing observations about family life. She listened to his ideas about modernizing the monarchy with genuine interest rather than polite obligation. Most remarkably, she challenged him intellectually while still showing the proper respect his position demanded. The moral complexity of his feelings wasn't lost on Charles. Kate was his daughter-in-law, married to his eldest son and heir. She was the mother of his grandchildren, including George, who would one day inherit the throne Charles was about to claim. By every measure of propriety and family loyalty, his thoughts about Kate were inappropriate and potentially destructive. Yet Charles couldn't shake the feeling that fate had played a cruel joke on him. Here was a woman who could have been the perfect queen consort, someone who understood the delicate balance between tradition and progress that the modern monarchy required. Instead, she was bound to William, and Charles was committed to Camilla, a woman who, despite her many qualities, would always be seen by a significant portion of the public as the other woman who broke up his marriage to Diana. The phone rang, interrupting his brooding. It was his private secretary, informing him that the Queen wished to see him at Buckingham Palace the following morning for what was described as an important discussion about the future. Charles knew what that meant. The transition was beginning, and soon he would face the most scrutinizing period of his life as he assumed the throne. Every decision he made would be analyzed, criticized, and debated by millions of people around the world. The choice of his queen consort would be particularly significant, sending messages about the values and direction of his reign. That evening, Charles attended a family dinner at Kensington Palace. William and Kate were hosting, along with several other family members, to celebrate Prince Louis's latest school achievement. As Charles watched Kate effortlessly manage the conversation, ensuring everyone felt included while gracefully handling the children's interruptions, he was struck again by her natural leadership abilities. Kate handles these family gatherings beautifully, Princess, and commented quietly to Charles as they observed Kate helping Louis with his dessert while simultaneously engaging the adults in conversation about an upcoming charitable initiative. She does indeed, Charles replied, trying to keep his voice neutral. She has a gift for bringing people together. It's more than that, and continued, unaware of the turmoil her observations were causing her brother. She understands what it means to serve. Not everyone born into this life grasps that concept, but Kate learned it and embraced it completely. During the dinner conversation, Kate mentioned a new program she was developing to support early childhood development in underserved communities. Her passion for the subject was evident as she described the research she had been studying and the innovative approaches she wanted to implement. The first 5 years of a child's life are absolutely critical, she explained, her eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. We have an opportunity to make a real difference in outcomes for generations if we can get the support structures right during those crucial early years. Charles found himself leaning forward, completely engaged by her vision and the thoughtful way she had approached the complex social issue. This was exactly the kind of forward-thinking, evidence-based approach to royal duties that he believed would be essential for the monarchy's relevance in the coming decades. Have you considered partnering with the university research programs? Charles asked. I know of several excellent child development departments that would be honored to collaborate on such an initiative. Kate's face brightened at the suggestion. That's a brilliant idea. I hadn't thought about the university connections, but that could really strengthen the academic foundation of the program. As the conversation continued, Charles noticed how naturally they collaborated on developing the idea further. Their minds seemed to work in harmony, building on each other's suggestions in a way that felt both intellectually stimulating and emotionally satisfying. Later that evening, as the family gathering wound down, Charles found himself alone with Kate in the drawing room, while William was upstairs helping put the children to bed. The room was softly lit by table lamps, creating an intimate atmosphere that made their conversation feel more personal than their usual formal interactions. I wanted to thank you for the suggestion about the universities, Kate said, settling into the chair across from him. Sometimes I get so focused on the practical implementation that I forget about the broader academic resources we could tap into. Your instincts about the program are excellent, Charles replied. It's exactly the kind of initiative that demonstrates how the monarchy can be a positive force for social change. They talked for another 20 minutes about various royal duties, charitable work, and their shared vision for how the institution could evolve to better serve the public. Charles was struck by how easy it was to talk with her, how she seemed to understand intuitively the challenges and opportunities that came with their unique positions in society. As Kate spoke about her hopes for the future and her commitment to using her platform responsibly, Charles felt a profound sense of recognition. This was the kind of partner he had always imagined having in his royal duties, someone who shared his values, understood the weight of their responsibilities, and brought fresh ideas and genuine passion to the work. When William returned from the children's bedtime routine, the moment of intimacy was broken, but the connection Charles felt with Kate remained. As he prepared to leave, she walked him to the door, a courtesy that wasn't strictly necessary, but felt natural and warm. Thank you for a lovely evening, Charles said, taking her hand briefly in the traditional royal farewell. Your hospitality always makes these family gatherings special. Family is everything, Kate replied, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his heart skip. We're so grateful to have you as part of ours. The simple words carried layers of meaning that neither of them could fully acknowledge, but Charles felt the weight of them as he walked to his waiting car. As his driver navigated the London streets back to Clarence House, Charles stared out at the city lights and wondered if he was losing his mind. Everything about his attraction to Kate was wrong, impossible, and potentially devastating to his family and the monarchy itself. Yet he couldn't deny that she represented everything he had ever wanted in a life partner: intelligence, grace, genuine warmth, and a shared commitment to service that went beyond mere obligation. Back in his study that night, Charles poured himself a brandy and sat in his favorite leather chair, trying to make sense of his feelings. The photograph of Kate still sat on his desk, and he found himself studying her face, looking for some sign of how she might feel about him. Had he imagined the moments of connection they had shared over the years? The lingering looks, the conversations that seemed to go deeper than necessary, the way she sometimes seemed to anticipate his thoughts before he expressed them? Or was he simply projecting his own feelings onto innocent interactions with a woman who was committed to her marriage and her role as his daughter-in-law? The complexity of the situation was overwhelming. Even if Kate somehow shared his feelings, acting on them would require dismantling the carefully constructed relationships that held his family together. William would be devastated and betrayed. The children would be confused and hurt. The public would be scandalized, and the monarchy itself could be irreparably damaged. Yet as Charles sat in the quiet of his study, nursing his brandy and watching the rain continue to fall against the windows, he couldn't escape the feeling that he was facing a crossroads that would define the rest of his life. In just a few months, he would be king, with all the power and responsibility that entailed. Would he use that position to honor his commitments and maintain the status quo, even if it meant sacrificing his personal happiness? Or would he find the courage to pursue what his heart told him was his true destiny, regardless of the consequences? The phone rang again, this time showing Camilla's name on the display. Charles stared at it for several rings before finally answering, knowing that her familiar voice would bring him back to the reality of his obligations and commitments. But as he lifted the receiver, his eyes remained fixed on Kate's photograph, and he wondered if he would have the strength to make the choice that duty demanded, or if his heart would ultimately prove stronger than his sense of royal responsibility. The conversation with Camilla was pleasant but routine, covering the next day's schedule and some details about an upcoming charity event. As always, she was efficient and supportive, discussing their shared responsibilities with the competence that had made her such a valuable partner over the years. Yet as Charles listened to her familiar voice, he felt a profound sense of distance, as if he was hearing her from across a vast chasm that had somehow opened between them. When he finally hung up the phone and prepared for bed, Charles knew that tomorrow's meeting with the Queen would force him to confront decisions he had been avoiding. The transition to his reign was imminent, and with it would come expectations about his personal life that he could no longer defer or ignore. The choice between duty and desire, between what was expected and what his heart yearned for, was approaching with the inevitability of dawn. As he turned off the lights in his study, leaving Kate's photograph in darkness, Charles wondered if he would find the courage to choose love over loyalty, knowing that either choice would change everything forever. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floor of Buckingham Palace as Charles made his way to his mother's private sitting room. The Queen, despite her advancing years, maintained her dignity and sharp intelligence, though Charles could see the weariness in her eyes that spoke of the enormous burden she had carried for over 7 decades. "Good morning, Mama," Charles said, kissing her cheek gently before taking the seat across from her antique writing desk. "Charles," she replied, her voice still carrying the authority that had commanded respect from world leaders for generations. "We need to discuss the arrangements for your coronation and the immediate decisions that will follow." The Queen's tone was businesslike, but Charles detected something else beneath the surface, a concern that went beyond the usual protocols and procedures they had discussed countless times before. She had always been perceptive about family dynamics, and he wondered if she had sensed the internal conflict that had been consuming him. "I've been reviewing the guest lists and ceremonial arrangements with the Archbishop of Canterbury," the Queen continued, opening a leather-bound folder. "However, there's a more pressing matter we must address regarding Camilla's role as Queen Consort." Charles felt his stomach tighten. The conversation he had been dreading was beginning earlier than he had expected. "The public has largely accepted your marriage to Camilla," the Queen said carefully. "But there are still segments of the population who remember the circumstances of your divorce from Diana. Your choice of Queen Consort will be seen as a reflection of your values as king, and will set the tone for your entire reign." "I'm aware of the sensitivities involved," Charles replied, though his voice lacked conviction. The Queen studied her son's face with the practiced eye of someone who had spent decades reading people's true intentions behind their diplomatic words. "Charles, is there something you're not telling me? You seem unusually conflicted about what should be a straightforward matter." For a moment, Charles considered confessing everything to his mother, his feelings for Kate, his doubts about Camilla, his growing certainty that he had made fundamental errors in his personal life that would haunt his reign. The Queen had always been his most trusted advisor, and her wisdom had guided him through countless difficult decisions over the years. But how could he explain that he had fallen in love with his son's wife? How could he tell the woman who had dedicated her life to the institution of monarchy that he was considering actions that could potentially destroy the very foundation she had worked so hard to preserve? I've simply been reflecting on the enormous responsibility that lies ahead, Charles said finally, choosing his words carefully. The decision about who stands beside me as queen consort will affect not just my personal happiness, but the future of the monarchy itself. The queen's expression softened slightly. You've always been more reflective than your siblings, Charles. It's one of your strengths, but it can also be a weakness if it leads to indecision when clear action is required. Before Charles could respond, there was a soft knock at the door, and the Queen's private secretary entered to inform them that Princess Anne had arrived for what had apparently been a pre-planned family discussion, and entered with her characteristic directness, offering brief greetings before settling into the third chair that had been arranged around the Queen's desk. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything crucial," she said, though her tone suggested she knew exactly why she had been summoned. "We were just discussing the arrangements for Charles's coronation," the Queen replied. "I thought it would be helpful to have your perspective on some of the more delicate matters," and turned to Charles with the frank gaze that had always made him slightly uncomfortable. As the hardest-working member of the royal family, with an uncompromising dedication to duty, she had little patience for what she considered emotional self-indulgence. "The question of Camilla's role seems to be causing you some difficulty," and observed. "I'm not sure why. She's been your wife for nearly 2 decades. She's proven herself capable and dedicated. The transition should be automatic." "It's not that simple," Charles found himself saying before he could stop the words. Both women looked at him with surprise. The Queen leaned forward slightly, her attention fully focused on her son. "What exactly do you mean by that?" and asked, her voice sharp with concern. Charles felt as if he was standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that his next words would either pull him back to safety or send him tumbling into an abyss from which there would be no return. "I mean that the choice of queen consort is about more than just honoring my marriage to Camilla," he said slowly. "It's about choosing the person who will best serve the monarchy and the British people for the next phase of our history." The Queen's eyes narrowed slightly. "Are you suggesting that Camilla would not serve effectively as queen consort?" "I'm suggesting that there might be someone better suited to the role," Charles replied, his heart pounding so hard he was certain the others could hear it. Anne's expression shifted from concern to alarm. "Charles, what are you talking about? You can't simply decide to choose a different queen consort because you think someone else might be more effective. You're married to Camilla. That's not a minor detail that can be overlooked." "What if the marriage was a mistake?" Charles asked, the words tumbling out before he could reconsider them. "What if I married the wrong person and am only now realizing it?" The silence that followed was so profound that Charles could hear the ticking of the antique clock on the mantelpiece. The Queen's face had gone very still, and looked as if she couldn't quite believe what she had heard. "Charles," the Queen said finally, her voice carefully controlled, "you need to explain exactly what you're thinking, because what you're suggesting could have consequences far beyond your personal happiness." Taking a deep breath, Charles made the decision to reveal at least part of his truth. "I've come to realize that Kate would make an extraordinary queen consort. She has all the qualities we need for the modern monarchy: intelligence, grace, genuine connection with the public, and a vision for how our institutions can evolve to serve contemporary society." And stared at him in disbelief. "Kate? As in Catherine, Duchess of Cambridge? William's wife? The mother of your grandchildren?" "Yes," Charles said simply. "Have you lost your mind?" and demanded, her composure finally cracking. "She's married to your son, your heir, the future king. What you're suggesting isn't just inappropriate. It's potentially catastrophic for the entire royal family." The Queen held up a hand to quiet and, though her own expression was deeply troubled. "Charles, I need you to explain very clearly what you're proposing. Are you suggesting that you want to divorce Camilla and somehow convince Kate to divorce William so that she can marry you instead?" When Charles didn't immediately respond, the Queen continued, her voice growing harder. "Because if that's what you're thinking, I need to tell you that such an action would likely destroy the monarchy entirely. The scandal would be unprecedented. Parliament might very well decide that the institution has outlived its usefulness." "I know the risks," Charles said quietly. "But I also know that Kate represents the future of the monarchy in a way that Camilla never could. The public adores her. She connects with people across all demographics. She understands how to balance tradition with progress. She could help me transform the institution for the 21st century, at the cost of tearing our family apart," and said harshly, "William would never forgive you. The children would be traumatized. And Kate herself, Have you even considered what this would do to her? She's built her entire adult life around her marriage to William and her role as a mother. Kate is unhappy, Charles said, the words feeling strange as he spoke them aloud for the first time. She and William have grown apart. Their marriage has become more of a professional partnership than a romantic relationship. How could you possibly know that? The Queen asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. Charles hesitated, realizing he was about to cross another line from which there would be no return. Because Kate and I have talked about it. We've been talking about many things, and I believe she shares some of my feelings about what we could accomplish together. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt dangerous, loaded with implications that none of them wanted to fully acknowledge, and stood abruptly and began pacing to the window. Charles, please tell me you haven't done anything inappropriate with Kate. Please tell me you haven't compromised her or yourself in any way that could be used against us. Our conversations have been completely proper, Charles said, though he knew that wasn't entirely true. While they had never crossed any physical boundaries, the emotional intimacy that had developed between them was hardly appropriate for a father-in-law and daughter-in-law. Proper conversations don't lead to discussions about leaving one's spouse, the Queen observed coldly. If Kate has indicated that she's unhappy in her marriage, that's a matter for her and William to resolve. It's not an invitation for you to insert yourself into their relationship. What if it's not that simple? Charles asked. What if Kate and I have found something together that neither of us expected? What if we could serve the monarchy better together than we can in our current situations? Then, you're both being incredibly selfish, and said bluntly, turning from the window to face her brother. Your personal feelings don't matter compared to the stability of the institution and the well-being of your family. William is your heir. Kate is his wife and the mother of the future king. You cannot disrupt that for your own romantic fantasies. They're not fantasies, Charles protested. Kate and I have a genuine connection. We understand each other in ways that I've never experienced with anyone else, including Camilla. The Queen stood slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. When she spoke, her voice carried the full authority of her 7 decades on the throne. Charles, I'm going to say this once, and I expect you to listen very carefully. You will not pursue this course of action. You will not discuss your feelings with Kate again. You will not take any steps toward ending your marriage to Camilla. And you will not do anything that could destabilize William's position as your heir. But, Mama, Charles began. I'm not finished, the Queen cut him off. You have spent your entire life preparing to be king. You have waited 74 years for this role. If you throw it all away for what you think is love, you will not only destroy yourself and your family, but you will betray every person who has served this institution with dedication and sacrifice. Charles felt as if he was being physically crushed by the weight of his mother's disappointment and authority. What if you're wrong? What if Kate and I could actually strengthen the monarchy by being together? Then you're both deluding yourselves, and said harshly. The monarchy survives because it represents stability, continuity, and moral authority. A king who abandons his wife for his son's wife represents chaos, betrayal, and moral bankruptcy. The public would never forgive it, and neither would I. The Queen moved closer to Charles, her expression softening slightly with what might have been sympathy. I know you've always struggled with matters of the heart, Charles. Your divorce from Diana was painful for everyone involved. Your relationship with Camilla was controversial. But you made your choice when you married her, and you must honor that choice. Even if it means being miserable for the rest of my life. Charles asked quietly. Even then, the Queen replied firmly. Being king is not about personal happiness. It's about service, duty, and sacrifice. If you're not prepared to make those sacrifices, then perhaps you should consider whether you're truly ready to wear the crown. The threat implicit in her words was clear. If Charles continued down this path, he would not only lose his family's support, but potentially his claim to the throne itself. I need time to think, Charles said finally, feeling defeated and confused. You have until tomorrow morning, the Queen replied. I want your word that you will end whatever inappropriate relationship has developed between you and Kate, and that you will recommit yourself to your marriage and your duties. And if I can't give you that word? Charles asked. Then, we'll need to discuss alternative arrangements for the succession, the Queen said simply. As Charles left Buckingham Palace that afternoon, his mind was reeling with the implications of what had just occurred. In the span of one conversation, he had revealed his deepest secret and been given an ultimatum that could cost him everything he had worked toward his entire life. The drive back to Clarence's house passed in a blur, and Charles found himself staring out at the London streets without really seeing them. He had always known that pursuing his feelings for Kate would be complicated, but he hadn't fully grasped how completely it could unravel not just his personal life, but the entire structure of the monarchy. Yet, even faced with the very real threat of losing his birthright, Charles couldn't shake the conviction that Kate represented something precious that he might never find again. The question now was whether he had the courage to fight for what his heart told him was right, even if it meant losing everything else he held dear. That evening, Charles found himself walking the grounds of Highgrove House, his country estate where he had always found peace among the carefully cultivated gardens he had designed himself. The autumn air was crisp, and the last roses of the season still bloomed despite the approaching winter. Usually, the tranquil beauty of this place could calm his most troubled thoughts, but tonight, even his beloved gardens couldn't quiet the storm raging in his mind. He had called Kate that afternoon, asking her to meet him here for what he described as an urgent conversation about family matters. She had agreed, though he could hear the confusion in her voice. William was away in Scotland on official duties, and she had arranged for the children to stay with their nanny at Kensington Palace. As Charles waited in his study, surrounded by his architectural drawings and organic farming journals, he tried to formulate the words that would either change both their lives forever or end the connection that had become so precious to him. The ultimatum from the Queen echoed in his mind, but so did his growing certainty that what he felt for Kate was unlike anything he had ever experienced. The sound of a car on the gravel drive announced Kate's arrival. Charles watched from his window as she emerged from her vehicle, elegant as always in a simple navy dress and cream coat. Even from a distance, he could see the concern in her posture as she approached the house. "Charles," she said when he met her at the door, "is everything all right? You sounded quite serious on the phone." "Please, come in," he replied, leading her to his private study rather than one of the more formal reception rooms. The choice of setting wasn't lost on either of them. This was the most personal space in the house, filled with his books, his artwork, and the possessions that revealed his true character rather than his public persona. Kate settled into the leather chair across from his desk, declining his offer of tea or wine. She sat with the poise that had made her a natural at royal duties, but Charles could see the tension in her shoulders and the way her hands remained folded carefully in her lap. "Kate," he began, then stopped, realizing that despite all his preparation, he still had no idea how to begin this conversation. "I need to tell you something that may shock you, and I need to ask you something that may change everything between us." Her blue eyes widened slightly, but she remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "This morning, I had a conversation with the Queen and Princess and about my future as king," Charles said, choosing his words carefully. "During that discussion, I revealed something that I probably should have kept to myself." "What did you tell them?" Kate asked quietly. "I told them that I believe you would make an extraordinary queen consort," Charles said, watching her face carefully for her reaction. "I told them that you have all the qualities the modern monarchy needs, and that I think you could help transform the institution for the better." Kate's expression remained carefully neutral, though Charles noticed her hands tightening slightly in her lap. "Charles, I'm already committed to serving the monarchy in my role as William's wife and as the future queen consort when he becomes king. What if there was another way?" Charles asked, leaning forward in his chair. "What if you could serve in a more immediate role, with more influence and more opportunity to make the changes we've discussed?" The silence that followed stretched between them like a bridge that neither was quite ready to cross. Kate's face had gone very still, and Charles could see her mind working through the implications of what he was suggesting. "Charles," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "are you asking me what I think you're asking me?" "I'm asking if you would consider leaving William and marrying me instead," Charles said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I know how it sounds. I know all the reasons it seems impossible. But, Kate, what we have together, the connection, the understanding, the shared vision for what we could accomplish, it's something extraordinary." Kate stood abruptly and walked to the window, her back to him as she stared out at the garden. Charles could see the tension in her shoulders and knew that he had just shattered the careful balance they had maintained for so long. "You can't be serious," she said without turning around. "I've never been more serious about anything in my life," Charles replied, standing and moving closer to her, though he was careful not to invade her personal space. "Kate, I know this seems sudden, but my feelings for you have been growing for years. Every conversation we've had, every moment we've spent working together, has convinced me more that we're meant to be partners in every sense of the word. Kate turned to face him, and Charles was surprised to see tears in her eyes. Charles, do you have any idea what you're asking of me? You're asking me to leave my husband, to break up my children's family, to cause a scandal that would destroy everything we've all worked to build. I'm asking you to consider whether you might be happier and more fulfilled in a different life, Charles said gently. Kate, I see how you and William are together. You're wonderful partners in your royal duties, but there's no passion there anymore, is there? No sense that you're truly connected on a deep level. Kate's composure finally cracked, and she sank back into her chair, covering her face with her hands. That's not fair, she said, her voice muffled. William and I have built a good life together. We have beautiful children. We work well as a team. But do you love him? Charles asked quietly. Not as a partner or co-parent, but as a woman loves a man. When he walks into a room, does your heart race? When you talk to him, do you feel understood and cherished? Kate looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Love isn't just about racing hearts and romantic feelings. It's about commitment, loyalty, building something together over time. You're right, Charles agreed. But it can be both. It should be both. Kate, when I'm with you, I feel alive in a way I haven't felt in decades. Our conversations energize me. Your ideas inspire me. When I think about the future of the monarchy, I can't imagine facing those challenges with anyone but you. And what about Camilla? Kate asked. You made vows to her too. Doesn't she deserve the same loyalty you're asking me to abandon? Charles felt a stab of guilt at the mention of his wife, but he pressed on. My marriage to Camilla was born out of duty and companionship, not passion. We care for each other, but we both know our relationship lacks the depth that a true partnership should have. Camilla deserves to be with someone who can love her completely, just as you deserve to be with someone who truly appreciates all that you are. Kate was quiet for a long moment, and Charles could see her internal struggle playing out across her features. When she finally spoke, her voice was so soft he had to strain to hear her. There have been times when I've wondered what it would be like if circumstances were different, she admitted. Times when our conversations have felt more intimate and meaningful than anything I share with William. But, Charles, wondering and acting are two completely different things. Charles felt his heart leap at her admission, but he forced himself to remain calm. What if I told you that we could make this work? That we could weather the initial scandal and emerge as a stronger, more effective royal partnership than either of us could be in our current situations? How? Kate asked, looking at him with a mixture of hope and despair. How could we possibly make this work without destroying everyone we care about? We would have to be brave, Charles said, moving to kneel beside her chair so they were at eye level. We would have to be willing to endure criticism and opposition from people who can't see the bigger picture. But, Kate, think about what we could accomplish together. Think about the changes we could make, the people we could help, the legacy we could build. Kate reached out tentatively and touched his face, a gesture so gentle and intimate that Charles felt his breath catch. You're asking me to give up everything I know, everything I've built my identity around, for something that might not work at all. I'm asking you to trust that what we have together is worth the risk, Charles replied, covering her hand with his own. Kate, I believe we could be extraordinary together. Not just as king and queen consort, but as partners, as equals working toward the same goals with the same vision. For a moment, they remained frozen in that position, the weight of possibility hanging between them like something almost tangible. Then, Kate gently pulled her hand away and stood, walking back to the window. Even if I wanted to do this, she said, her back to him again, the practical obstacles are enormous. William would fight for custody of the children. The Queen would never approve. Parliament might intervene. The public might revolt. The Queen has already threatened to remove me from the succession if I pursue this, Charles admitted. She's given me until tomorrow morning to recommit to my marriage and my duties as they currently stand. Kate whirled around, her face pale with shock. Charles, if she's already threatened that, then you have to know this is impossible. You can't risk losing the crown for something that might not even work between us. The crown means nothing to me without someone to share it with who truly understands what we're trying to accomplish, Charles said, standing and moving toward her again. Kate, I would rather spend whatever years I have left as a private citizen with you than spend them as a king in a marriage that feels more like a business arrangement. That's romantic nonsense, Kate said sharply, though her voice lacked conviction. You've been preparing to be king your entire life. You can't throw that away for love, especially love that might not survive the reality of what we'd have to go through to be together. What if it's not just about love? Charles asked. What if it's about doing what's best for the monarchy and the British people? Kate, you connect with the public in ways that no one else in our family has managed since Diana. You understand modern social issues. You have fresh ideas about how our institutions can evolve. With you as queen consort, I could usher in a new era of royal relevance and effectiveness. Kate stared at him for a long moment, and Charles could see the conflict in her eyes. He knew she was weighing not just her personal feelings, but all the implications for their families, the monarchy, and the nation itself. I need time to think, she said finally. This is not a decision I can make in one evening, no matter how compelling your arguments might be. How much time? Charles asked. Because I have to give the queen an answer tomorrow morning. Then, you'll have to tell her you need more time, Kate replied. Charles, if we're going to do this, and I'm not saying we are, but if we're going to consider it seriously, we need to plan it carefully. We need to think through every possible consequence and have strategies for managing them. Charles felt a surge of hope at her words. She wasn't saying yes, but she wasn't saying no either. She was approaching it with the same thoughtful, strategic mind that had made her so effective in her royal duties. What would you need from me to help you make this decision? He asked. Honesty, Kate said immediately. Complete honesty about what you think this would really look like. Not the romantic fantasy, but the practical reality. How would we handle the children? How would we manage the public relations disaster? How would we deal with William's anger and hurt? How would we rebuild the monarchy's reputation after the scandal? And if I can provide satisfactory answers to all those questions? Charles asked. Kate met his eyes with a steadiness that reminded him why he had fallen in love with her intelligence and strength. Then, I'll consider it. But, Charles, you need to understand that even if I decide I want to try, I might not have the courage to actually go through with it. Wanting something and being brave enough to pursue it are two different things. I understand, Charles said, though inside he was already beginning to formulate plans for addressing every concern she had raised. Kate, I want you to know that whatever you decide, I don't regret telling you how I feel. These past few years of getting to know you, of working with you, of discovering what a remarkable woman you are, they've been the happiest of my life. Kate's eyes filled with tears again, but this time she didn't look away. Charles, if we do this, there's no going back. Our lives will never be the same. Are you absolutely certain you're ready for that? I've never been more certain of anything, Charles replied. The question is whether you're ready to take that leap with me. As Kate prepared to leave that evening, she paused at the door of his study and turned back to face him. If I do this, I'm not just choosing you over William. I'm choosing a completely different life, a different future for my children, a different role in history. I need you to understand the magnitude of what you're asking. I do understand, Charles said. And I need you to understand that I'm not just asking you to marry me. I'm asking you to help me reshape the monarchy for the 21st century. I'm asking you to be my partner in the most important work of our lives. Kate nodded slowly, then reached into her purse and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. I wrote this while you were talking, she said, handing it to him. Don't read it until after I'm gone. And Charles, whatever I decide, promise me we'll always be honest with each other from this moment forward. After Kate's car disappeared down the drive, Charles returned to his study and carefully unfolded the paper she had given him. In her elegant handwriting, she had written simply, I think I've been waiting my whole life for someone to ask me this question. Now I have to find the courage to answer it. As Charles read those words again and again, he realized that everything was about to change, and for the first time in months, he felt genuinely hopeful about the future. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching the somber mood that had settled over the royal family. Charles had spent most of the night awake, pacing his study and rehearsing different versions of the conversation he would need to have with the Queen. Kate's note lay on his desk, read and reread until he had memorized every curve of her handwriting. At precisely 9 o'clock, Charles's phone rang with the expected call from Buckingham Palace. The Queen's private secretary informed him that Her Majesty would see him at 11, and that Princess and would also be present. The formal tone suggested that this would not be a casual family chat, but rather a decisive meeting that would determine the direction of his future. Meanwhile, at Kensington Palace, Kate was struggling with her own morning routine. She had returned from Highgrove the previous evening in a state of emotional turmoil that she was finding impossible to hide from her staff. The children had sensed her distraction during breakfast, with little Louis asking repeatedly if Mummy was feeling sick. "I'm fine, darling," Kate had assured him, though the lie felt heavy on her tongue. She was far from fine. She was contemplating a decision that would upend not just her own life, but the lives of everyone she loved. As she went through the motions of her morning schedule, reviewing briefings for upcoming engagements, approving menu selections for a charity luncheon, responding to correspondence, Kate's mind kept returning to Charles's words from the night before. The passion in his voice when he spoke about their potential partnership, the way his eyes had lit up when discussing their shared vision for the monarchy, the genuine affection and respect she had seen when he looked at her. Her marriage to William had been built on solid foundations of mutual respect, shared values, and complementary strengths. They had created a beautiful family together and established themselves as one of the most effective royal couples in recent history. But Charles was right about one thing. The spark that had once existed between them had faded into comfortable partnership. Kate couldn't remember the last time William had looked at her the way Charles had the previous evening, as if she was the most fascinating person in the world, as if her thoughts and opinions mattered more than anything else. Their conversations had become dominated by logistics and schedules, with little room for the kind of intellectual and emotional intimacy that she craved. The phone rang, interrupting her brooding. It was William calling from Scotland, his voice cheerful as he described his meetings with local officials and his plans for the remainder of his tour. "How are things at home?" he asked, the question perfunctory rather than deeply interested. "Fine," Kate replied automatically. "The children are well. I have the charity luncheon tomorrow, and then the museum opening on Friday." "Excellent," William said, already moving on to discuss his own schedule. "I should be back by Sunday evening. Make sure the staff has my briefing materials ready for the Monday meeting with the Foreign Secretary." The conversation continued for several more minutes, covering practical matters and family logistics. But Kate noticed that William never asked how she was feeling, never inquired about her thoughts or concerns. When he did ask about her upcoming engagements, it was with the detached interest of a colleague rather than the caring attention of a husband. After hanging up, Kate sat staring at her phone, struck by the contrast between this conversation and her discussions with Charles. When Charles asked about her work, he wanted to understand not just what she was doing, but why she was passionate about it. He remembered details from previous conversations and built on her ideas in ways that made her feel truly heard and valued. The realization was both liberating and terrifying. If she was honest with herself, she had to admit that her marriage to William had become more of a professional arrangement than a romantic partnership. They were excellent co-workers in the business of being royal, but they had lost the emotional connection that should bind a husband and wife together. At Buckingham Palace, Charles was facing his own moment of truth. He entered the Queen's sitting room to find both his mother and sister waiting for him with expressions that suggested they expected this conversation to be brief and definitive. "Charles," the Queen began without preamble, "I trust you've used the past day to reflect carefully on our discussion and to remember your duties and obligations." "I have reflected," Charles replied, taking his seat across from them. "But I'm afraid my conclusion is not what you hoped to hear." The Queen's face hardened. "Charles, please don't tell me you're still entertaining this ridiculous notion about Kate." "It's not ridiculous," Charles said firmly. "And, after speaking with Kate last evening, I believe she may be willing to consider a future together," and made a sound of disgust and stood abruptly. "You spoke to her? Charles, please tell me you haven't involved an innocent woman in your midlife crisis." "Kate is hardly innocent in this situation," Charles replied. "She's an intelligent adult who understands the implications of what we're discussing. And she's not as happy in her current situation as you might assume." "What exactly did she say to you?" the Queen asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Charles hesitated, unwilling to reveal the contents of Kate's note, but needing to convey that his feelings were not entirely one-sided. "She indicated that she shares some of my concerns about our current situations and that she's willing to consider alternatives." "Alternatives?" and repeated flatly. "You mean she's willing to consider destroying her marriage, traumatizing her children, and causing the biggest royal scandal since the abdication crisis? She's willing to consider whether we might be able to build something better together than what we have separately," Charles corrected. "And, Kate, and I have discussed this rationally and thoughtfully. We both understand the risks, but we also understand the potential benefits. The only benefit I can see is your personal gratification, the Queen said coldly. Charles, you are about to become king. Your personal desires cannot be allowed to destabilize the institution. What if my personal desires align with what's best for the institution? Charles asked. Kate is the most popular member of our family. She connects with the public in ways that none of the rest of us can match. With her as queen consort, I could modernize the monarchy and ensure its relevance for future generations. And you think the public would support a king who abandoned his wife for his daughter-in-law? And asked incredulously. Charles, you're deluding yourself if you think this would be seen as anything other than a selfish betrayal. The public loves Kate, Charles insisted. If they understood that this was about creating the strongest possible leadership for the monarchy, I believe they would eventually support it. The Queen studied her son's face for a long moment, and Charles could see her assessing not just his words but his resolve. When she spoke again, her voice carried the full weight of her authority. Charles, I am going to give you one final choice. You can recommit to your marriage to Camilla and take your place as king with my full support, or you can pursue this destructive course and face the consequences. What consequences? Charles asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. If you take any action to pursue a relationship with Kate, I will recommend to Parliament that the succession pass directly to William, the Queen said calmly. You will be removed from the line of succession, and your royal titles will be revoked. The threat hung in the air like a physical presence. Charles felt the weight of 74 years of preparation and expectation pressing down on him. But he also felt the pull of possibility that Kate represented. You would really do that? He asked quietly. I would do whatever is necessary to protect the monarchy from destruction, the Queen replied. Charles, I have dedicated my entire life to this institution. I will not allow it to be damaged by what amounts to an elderly man's romantic fantasy. It's not a fantasy, Charles protested. Kate and I could be extraordinary together. We could transform the monarchy into something more relevant and effective than it's ever been. Or you could destroy it entirely, and interjected. Charles, even if the public eventually accepted your relationship with Kate, the process of getting there would be catastrophic. The scandal would dominate headlines for years. Our charitable work would be overshadowed by gossip and speculation. The very purpose of the monarchy would be lost. Charles looked between his mother and sister, seeing in their faces the weight of tradition, duty, and institutional preservation that had shaped his entire life. He also saw fear that his actions could undo decades of careful reputation management and modernization. But when he thought about Kate, about the way she had looked at him the previous evening and the words she had written in her note, he felt something more powerful than fear. He felt hope. I need to speak with Kate one more time, Charles said finally. I need to know definitively whether she's willing to go forward with this before I make my final decision. You will do no such thing, the Queen commanded. Charles, if you have any remaining contact with Kate about this matter, I will consider it a direct violation of my explicit instructions. Then, you're asking me to make a decision without all the information I need, Charles replied. Kate is not just a passive participant in this situation. She has agency and feelings and opinions that matter. What matters is the stability of the crown and the well-being of this family, the Queen said firmly. Charles, I am ordering you to end this nonsense immediately and recommit yourself to your existing responsibilities. Charles stood slowly, feeling the full weight of the moment. And if I refuse? Then, you will no longer be my heir or my son in any meaningful sense, the Queen replied, her voice breaking slightly on the last words. The pain in her voice was almost more than Charles could bear. His mother had been the most constant presence in his life, the person he had most wanted to please and serve. The thought of losing her approval and love was devastating. But, as he looked at her face, aged by decades of service and sacrifice, Charles realized that he was facing the same choice she had made countless times throughout her reign, the choice between personal happiness and duty to the crown. She had chosen duty every time, and it had made her an extraordinary queen but had cost her in ways that were never acknowledged publicly. I won't give you an answer now, Charles said quietly, but I will give you one by this evening. Charles, the Queen began. This evening, Charles repeated, then turned and walked from the room, leaving behind the two women who represented everything he had been taught to value and respect. As he drove through London back to Clarence House, Charles felt as if he was seeing the city with new eyes. These were the streets he had been born to serve, the people he had been prepared his entire life to lead. But they were also the streets where Kate lived and worked, where she had built her life and raised her children. The choice before him was brutal in its simplicity. He could preserve everything he had always been expected to become, or he could risk everything for the chance to become something different and potentially better. By the time he reached his study, Charles knew what he needed to do. He picked up his phone and sent a simple text message to Kate. "I need to see you tonight. Everything depends on our conversation." The response came back quickly. "I've been waiting for you to call. Come to Kensington Palace at 8. We need to talk about the future." As Charles read her message, he realized that Kate had already made her choice. The question now was whether he would have the courage to match her bravery and step into an uncertain future that might either fulfill his deepest dreams or destroy everything he had ever known. The rain had stopped by the time Charles arrived at Kensington Palace that evening, but the air remained heavy with moisture and tension. The palace grounds were quieter than usual, with most of the staff having departed for the day, leaving only essential security personnel who nodded respectfully as Charles made his way to the private entrance of William and Kate's apartment. Kate answered the door herself, having dismissed her personal staff for the evening. She looked composed but pale, wearing a simple black dress that seemed appropriate for what felt like a moment of mourning, for their old lives, perhaps, or for the innocence they were about to lose forever. "The children?" Charles asked as she led him to her private sitting room. "At my mother's for the night," Kate replied. "I thought it best that we have complete privacy for this conversation." The sitting room was elegant but comfortable, filled with family photographs and the children's artwork alongside more formal royal portraits. It was a space that spoke of Kate's ability to balance her public role with her private life as a mother and wife. Charles noticed that most of the photographs showed Kate with the children or at official events. There were surprisingly few candid shots of her and William together. "I've been thinking all day about what you said last night," Kate began, settling into her usual chair while Charles took the sofa across from her. "I've been thinking about what I want my life to look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, when I'm old, and looking back on the choices I made." "And what conclusion did you reach?" Charles asked, though her presence and the careful way she had arranged this meeting already suggested her answer. "That I've been sleepwalking through my life," Kate said quietly. "Charles, when you asked me yesterday if I love William, I couldn't give you an honest answer because I wasn't being honest with myself. The truth is that I love him as the father of my children and as a good man who has always treated me with respect and kindness. But I'm not in love with him. I haven't been for years." Charles felt his heart begin to race, but he forced himself to remain calm. "That doesn't necessarily mean that leaving him is the right choice." "No, it doesn't," Kate agreed. "But what you offered me yesterday, the chance to be truly seen and appreciated, to work alongside someone who values my ideas and understands my passions, to build something meaningful together, that's what I want my life to be." She paused and looked directly into his eyes. "Charles, I want to try this with you. I want to see what we could accomplish together, both personally and for the monarchy. But I need to know that you understand what we're really committing to. Tell me what you think we're committing to," Charles said, leaning forward slightly. Kate stood and moved to the window, much as she had the previous evening. "We're committing to enduring years of intense scrutiny and criticism. We're committing to hurting people we care about, including our children. We're committing to each other without knowing for certain that what we feel now will survive the pressure we'll face. And are you willing to make those commitments?" Charles asked. Kate turned back to face him, and Charles was struck by the strength and determination in her expression. This wasn't the hesitant, conflicted woman who had left his study the night before. This was someone who had made a decision and was prepared to see it through. "Yes," she said simply, "but only if we do this right. Only if we have a plan that minimizes the damage to our families and gives us the best chance of success." Charles stood and moved toward her, stopping just close enough to take her hands in his. "What kind of plan?" "First, we need to tell William together," Kate said. "He deserves to hear this from both of us, and he deserves to understand that this isn't about any failing on his part. He's a good man and a good father, but we're not right for each other as husband and wife." Charles nodded, though the thought of facing his son's anger and hurt was almost unbearable. As soon as he returns from Scotland, we'll tell him that we've fallen in love and that we want to be together. We'll make it clear that this is about our feelings for each other, not about any problems in my marriage to him. And then? Charles asked. Then, we tell the children. Kate continued, her voice becoming softer. We'll need professional help with that. Child psychologists who can guide us through the process of explaining why their family is changing. We'll need to make sure they understand that both their father and I will always love them, and that they'll always be our priority. Charles squeezed her hands gently. Kate, are you sure you're ready to put them through that pain? I'm sure that children are better off with parents who are honest and fulfilled than with parents who are going through the motions of a marriage that's ended in everything but name, Kate replied firmly. Charles, George, Charlotte, and Louis are strong, intelligent children who are surrounded by love and support. They'll adjust to this change better than we might expect, especially if we handle it with honesty and sensitivity. What about the Queen? Charles asked. She's threatened to remove me from the succession if I pursue this. Kate's expression grew more serious. Then, we need to be prepared for that possibility. Charles, if the Queen follows through on her threat, are you prepared to live as a private citizen? Are you prepared to give up the crown for me? Charles looked into her eyes and realized that the answer came without hesitation. Yes, Kate, I would rather spend the rest of my life as a private citizen with you than spend it as a king without you. And I would rather be the wife of a private citizen who truly loves and values me than the queen consort of a king who married me out of duty, Kate replied. But, Charles, I don't think it will come to that. What do you mean? Kate smiled for the first time that evening, and Charles felt his heart lift at the sight. I mean that I think the Queen is bluffing. Yes, she's angry and disappointed, and yes, she genuinely believes this is a mistake. But, when faced with the actual choice between having you as king with me as your queen consort, or having no Charles in the succession at all, I think she'll choose the former. You think she'll accept us? Charles asked, hardly daring to hope. I think she'll realize that the monarchy's best chance for success in the coming decades is with both of us working together, Kate said. Charles, your mother is many things, but she's not stupid. She knows that I'm popular with the public and effective in my royal duties. She knows that you and I work well together. Once the initial shock and anger fade, I believe she'll see the practical advantages of our partnership. Charles pulled Kate closer, and, for the first time, they embraced as something more than family members. The feel of her in his arms was everything he had imagined, and more, a perfect fit that seemed to confirm that this decision, however difficult, was right. There's something else we need to discuss, Kate said, her voice slightly muffled against his shoulder. What's that? The timing of our announcements, she said, pulling back to look at him again. We can't just spring this on everyone simultaneously. We need a careful sequence that gives each person time to process and react before the news becomes public. What do you suggest? Charles asked. We tell William first, then the children, then your mother, and the rest of the family. We give them a week or two to adjust before we make any public announcements. And we need to have a complete media strategy in place before any of this becomes public knowledge. Charles marveled at her thoroughness and strategic thinking. Even in the midst of making the most emotionally charged decision of her life, Kate was approaching it with the same careful planning that had made her so effective in her royal role. There's one more thing, Charles said. Camilla, I owe it to her to tell her personally before she hears it from anyone else. Kate nodded. That conversation will be difficult, but it's necessary. Charles, Camilla has been a part of your life for so long. Do you think she'll be completely surprised by this? Charles considered the question. I think she knows that our marriage has become more of a partnership than a romance. But I don't think she has any idea about my feelings for you. It will hurt her, and I hate that, but I think she'll ultimately understand. And if she doesn't? Kate asked. Then I'll have to live with that, Charles replied. Kate, I'm not naive about the pain this will cause. People will be hurt and angry. But I've come to believe that staying in situations that aren't right for us ultimately causes more pain than making difficult changes. They spent the next 2 hours planning the details of how they would handle the various conversations and announcements. Kate had thought through contingencies and complications with impressive thoroughness, and Charles found himself even more convinced that she would be an extraordinary partner in every aspect of their life together. As the evening grew late, they found themselves sitting together on the sofa, Kate's head resting on Charles's shoulder as they talked about their hopes for the future. What do you think we'll be able to accomplish together that we couldn't accomplish separately? Kate asked. I think we'll be able to modernize the monarchy in ways that preserve its essential character while making it more relevant and accessible to contemporary society, Charles replied. Your instincts for connecting with people, combined with my experience and institutional knowledge, could be powerful. I think we could also be truly happy, Kate said quietly. Charles, I know that sounds selfish given everything we're risking, but I think we could have the kind of partnership that energizes and fulfills both of us. It doesn't sound selfish, Charles assured her. I think we deserve to be happy, and I think the monarchy deserves leaders who are happy and fulfilled. As Charles prepared to leave that evening, they made their final decision about timing. William would return from Scotland in 3 days. They would ask him to come to Kensington Palace that Sunday evening for what they would describe as an important family discussion. Are you absolutely certain about this? Charles asked as they stood at the door. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, Kate replied. Charles, whatever happens, we'll face it together. Together, Charles agreed, and sealed their pact with a kiss that felt like both an ending and a beginning. As Charles drove home to Clarence House, he felt a mixture of terror and exhilaration that he hadn't experienced since he was a young man. By this time next week, his entire life would be different. He would either be starting a new chapter with the woman he loved, or he would have lost everything he had ever known. But for the first time in decades, Charles felt truly alive. Whatever the consequences of their choice, he and Kate would face them together, and that made all the risks worthwhile. The future stretched ahead of them, uncertain but filled with possibility, and Charles found himself eager to discover what they could build together. The shocking choice had been made. Now came the even more challenging task of living with its consequences and proving to the world that love, when it was real and deep and grounded in shared values, could indeed transform even the most ancient and tradition-bound institutions. The monarchy would never be the same, but perhaps, Charles thought as he pulled into his driveway, that was exactly what it needed.